Good morning and welcome to PACT's MedTech Series. I'm Dean Miller, the President and CEO of PACT, and I want to welcome everybody online this morning for what is going to be a really interesting hour of conversation with a couple of entrepreneurs and folks from our community. I first want to thank our sponsors, Fox Rothschild, Dwayne Morris, and Eisner Amper, for their support of the PACT MedTech Series. Just as a reminder, we've got two 30-minute panel discussions today. There is an opportunity throughout to ask questions. You can use the Q&A window that you see on your screen to do so. We'll take questions throughout, and certainly at the end of the segment, our moderators will be looking at that. And then at 9:45 or thereabouts, we'll go back to tables for further networking. And you can, if you have not used this platform before, the remote platform allows you to click on different tables, move around, and chat with folks at your table. One last thing. We have one presenter in the second panel that's going to use some slides. And I want to remind you that when that person appears, when their slides appear, they'll be small on the screen. But in the upper right-hand corner of their slides, you'll see four arrows. And that is the full screen functionality that you can click on to see a full screen of the slides. We recommend that you do that, and that'll be during Grant Geiger's presentation. So without further ado, let me turn the first panel over to Michael Harrington. Michael is a partner at Fox Rothschild, also a longstanding PACT board member and terrific advocate, both for entrepreneurs in and beyond the Philadelphia region, but also MedTech entrepreneurs. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thanks so much, Dean, and good morning, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us this morning for our panel. We're going to be focusing on securing financing in the COVID era. Before I turn it over to the panel and we get moving through our discussion, let me just hit a couple ground rules and intro the topic correctly. So in terms of ground rules, we're about 30 minutes on the panel, so we're going to move quickly, but hopefully we do it in a good, smooth flow that really gives you a lot of good information by the end of it. We'll try, and I think we can, reserve room for questions probably at the end. On the right side of your screen, you've got a chat function. Use that to submit any questions. If you happen to give me a really good one during the presentation, I may work it in, but otherwise we'll try to reserve a couple minutes at the end. All right, in terms of turning to the panel, let me intro the topic correctly, and then I'll turn to both Melissa and Todd, our panel participants. And I'll start by saying that a lot has changed since March for all of us individually. We now wear masks. We've redefined business casual as something business up top and something very casual down below. We've all adapted to a remote work environment for the most part. We use terms like super spreader. Well, you know, a lot has changed for our MedTech companies as well. They are still unique companies that are moving through very rapid life cycles. They can't hit the pause button and wait until this thing's over, because if they do, unfortunately, they don't make it. They become a casualty of COVID. What's changed a lot is, well, what hasn't changed is they need financing, and financing is really the lifeblood of these companies. But what has changed is how we go about financing. And I will say, luckily, the VC industry is persevering through this. And there's great deal activity, in fact, great regional deal activity. And what we're going to do this morning is we're going to profile, we're going to take a good look at a very significant Series B financing closed by MOBILION Systems and Melissa Sherman with Todd Sone of aMoon Fund. We're going to take a look at that because while that deal, it started in the intro, came before COVID. That deal closed fully COVID, fully remote. Todd and Melissa will tell you, Todd actually hasn't even shaken Melissa's hand in person, has not been on site, and yet Todd led a $35 million Series B for a great regional company. So let me start with very quick introductions. I've already mentioned their names. This is Melissa Sherman, who's CEO of MOBILION Systems, great med tech company in our Chadds Ford area. This is Todd Sone, partner with aMoon Fund. Todd is actually in Israel, and that beautiful view behind him is Israel for us this morning, and about 7 hours ahead, so midday for him. Let me ask Melissa, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about MOBILION.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel today. Good morning, everybody. So MOBILION is a life science instrumentation company, and we commercialize products that better predict, diagnose, and treat disease. And the easiest way to think about what we do is we like to say we reveal what others leave unseen, meaning that our products provide unprecedented speed and resolution to identify the most challenging, clinically significant molecules that other instruments just fail to detect. And so what is our focus? Our focus is enabling our pharmaceutical customers to bring safer, more effective biologic drugs to market faster. And we also focus in clinical research with our clinical research customers to accelerate biomarker discovery to predict diseases earlier.
Melissa, tell us quickly where you are in your life cycle, whether you're still product development, whether you're at market, where are you?
Yep, so we are a pre-revenue company at this point, but we are on the cusp of launching our first product. So our first product will be launched in Q2 of 2021. So we've got the beta launch of our first product and the full launch next year. Great,
super. And Todd, welcome and good afternoon to you. As I mentioned, Todd is a partner with aMoon. aMoon is an Israeli fund that's actually very busy in the States and now nicely paying some good attention to our region here. So Todd, if you could introduce yourself and aMoon.
Sure, great. Thank you very much, Michael. And it's great to be back virtually in Philly. I did my MBA at Wharton, and so I'm dying to get back to eat some South Street pizza. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. So just a little bio about me. So I started my career after Wharton. I moved to Wall Street, where I was a pharmaceutical equity analyst at Goldman Sachs, and then at Morgan Stanley. After that, I went to run a family office whose source of wealth was in the generic pharmaceutical industry. And then for the last 10 years, I've been on the buy side, most of that time with a growth stage fund out of New York called Signet Healthcare Partners. And then I joined aMoon about 3 years ago to co-lead our late stage effort. So just very quickly about aMoon. So we're Israel's largest healthcare VC. We have about $1.1 billion under management. Although we're based here, we're a global fund. So our fund is made, we're closing our 15th investment actually in the next day. And 7 of those are based here in Israel, and 8 of them are based outside of Israel. And so we, because of the size of our fund, we are writing fairly large checks. So we're leading rounds, typically Series B and Series C rounds. And the investment that we made into MOBILION, where we invested $20 million out of a $35 million round, is kind of the snack bracket for us. So it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
All right, super. Thanks, both of you. Now, in terms of, for our audience, in terms of our flow today, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, MOBILION Series B financing with aMoon. And we're going to start by really showcasing Melissa and her process to find aMoon. Then we'll bring both of our panel participants together to talk about this COVID-infused investment process. And then we'll finish with Todd really being able to give us some insight into the VC world and what's happening in this COVID era. So to start off with, Melissa, we're going to start off with you and your quest for financing. So describe the process generally. I find that most of the entrepreneurs in the audience love to hear, how did you get this lucky to find, well, you did a Series A, but then you did a large Series B. How'd you find your investors, but in particular, how'd you find aMoon?
Yeah, so in terms of the process, I mean, right, financing is a never-ending process that I think for me started 6 months before we even officially incorporated the company. So it's a never-ending process, and we've been working at it since, for 4 years, basically. For the Series B round, we officially kicked off at JP Morgan in January. And, it was our B. We had a lot of contacts from the A. So we raised our B pretty quickly after raising the A. We had a large strategic investor who led the A round. And that board member investor and in combination with our chairman of the board had an incredible network of contacts in the venture community, as well as all of the contacts that we at MOBILION made throughout the financing process of the seed round and the Series A round. So when it came to the B, the B was a little bit easier than the A just because we had this established foundation of contact that only got better because of the quality of the people that we brought to the board in the A round. Specifically, interestingly enough, we really kicked off at JP Morgan in January. Things were going along swimmingly. We were gaining a lot of traction, and then COVID hit. And then I was thinking back and reflecting, actually, we weren't introduced to aMoon at JP Morgan. So in spite of all the activity that occurred at JP Morgan and all the traction that we got, I was connected with Todd and aMoon through the chairman of our board, Heiner Dreisman, who had a relationship with aMoon through other companies. So I think we were introduced, I was going back to think about it, like February 17th or 27th or something like that, which is basically 2 or 3 weeks before COVID hit and shut everything down.
Melissa, how do you feel? I'll give you kind of questions on both sides. When you're going through the process, when do you feel you're doing well and you're hitting some milestones and you feel like you're really going to get there? And when do you feel like, boy, I've got some roadblocks or I've got I'm lacking traction? What is that sense, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think forget about COVID for a second. Just in general, it's people return your calls and talk to you, right? When you're gaining traction, the investors are genuinely interested, and you're having conversation after conversation after conversation to keep the dialogue going and kind of allow them to dig in and ask more questions and to present your business a little bit more deeply. So, it's pretty obvious when it's not going well because you're just not gaining traction and they don't answer your calls, right? They just kind of go quiet for long periods of time. And, I think the B in JP Morgan, like I said, January and February was fantastic because we had these relationships from the A. So when we went to JP Morgan and we were talking to the investors about wanting to close the round by mid-year, we were gaining a lot of traction and we were starting to execute NDAs and really start to dig in. And then COVID hit.
So COVID hits, but you get the great introduction from Heiner to aMoon. So how did you describe the process with aMoon, the early process? What was the introduction like? How did you get to a point where you really targeted aMoon as a lead investor? And then describe the term sheet process.
Yeah, so obviously it was all done by Zoom, right? Heiner had a great relationship with aMoon, and I mean, for anyone that's done this, you have to have a warm introduction to people that you don't know and you've met for the first time. I mean, there's just no other way about it, right? And so Heiner's been involved with the company from the very early days, so he could speak, very intimately about MOBILION and our track record and our performance record. So he made the introduction, which helped us then start to establish the relationship with Todd and his team, which, as I said, is 100% via Zoom. Todd and I have never been in the same room together, so our relationship is 100% Zoom relationship. But we just, kept the conversations going, and what was interesting was we had other investors and we actually had other term sheets. So we did gain a lot of traction in spite of COVID hitting, and it was interesting to me because all of the relationships, well, I guess with aMoon and Todd was the only relationship that was 100% Zoom. I kind of knew everybody else and had met them. Yet I would say, why did we decide to go with aMoon and why did we move forward? It was based on the relationship that we developed and kind of the cultural alignment and, the shared vision for the future of the company.
That's great. So Todd, let's bring you into this now. From aMoon's perspective, before you talk about MOBILION and the specifics of this opportunity, talk generally about, what are the highlights of companies that grab your interest, and what are the highlights of the companies that go beyond that and you take the term sheet, and then we'll talk more about MOBILION.
Yeah. So I guess I want to dispel kind of some misnomers that exist out there. So when people think about what do VCs care about? I've kind of got this slide that I present, which is kind of like a target. And so the bullseye of what kind of typical entrepreneurs think that VCs care about in the target would be market size, right? VCs only want to invest in companies that have got big market sizes. Then kind of the outer ring of that would be valuation, right? A VC is just going to be laser focused on valuation. The next outer ring of that would be science. And then the final outer ring of that would be management. And it's actually the exact opposite. Yeah. Okay. So from my perspective, what's in the bullseye is management. That's first and foremost. The second ring, I would say, is science. The third ring is market access, not market sizing. And then the last thing is valuation. And so, the process that kind of we went through with MOBILION was really about spending as much time as we could and getting orthogonal points of view on Melissa and her team, and then digging deep into the science and understanding, the product market fit. And then kind of the last thing that I think we ever talked about was valuation. And because when you start to talk about valuation, your relationship ends up being about valuation. And when you're talking about, when you're focused on management and science and the market, then your relationship becomes about something more fundamental that is actually long lasting and what the CEO kind of really cares about after the financing is done. So that's how I like to build relationships. And that's how kind of we approached it, especially during Zoom, where we weren't able to form the in-person connection. So, doing this really at a micro level was kind of my tactic with Melissa.
So Todd, give us a look inside a VC fund. You're sitting around with your partners and March hits, COVID hits. What were the discussions at that level? Was it, hey, we got to shut it down. We can't do proper diligence. We can't get good companies. What was the conversation?
No, it was the opposite. So it was the opposite. It was actually, we looked at it and we said, there are going to be funds who are going to take that point of view, and understandably so. It's not that it's stupid. It's not that it's wrong. It's a reaction to the unknown and to fear, which is kind of it's sane. But we took the opposite approach, which was to say we're actually going to accelerate our pace of investing, and we're going to invest more time and more effort into finding great companies. And so that's what we went ahead and did. And actually, we built out some very specific things that we would do in the COVID era that we wouldn't have otherwise placed as much emphasis on in normal times. So yeah, it was definitely a priority decision to kind of go long.
So let's focus then on the MOBILION investment. And one of those things that certainly would have been different in the COVID era is diligence. So let's talk to both of you about the diligence process. Melissa, I'll start with you. The diligence process. How did you prepare for a fully virtual diligence process, and not just the document process, but all that Todd's mentioned, the relationship building and all of that?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think it was as hard as some might believe. I mean, we're all kind of used to Zoom now, right? And I think what's interesting about it is now that we're Zooming with one another, and plus with our situation, we have a time zone difference. So, right, there were some times where I'd be on really early in the morning and aMoon would be on at midnight at night. And, we're coming to each other and Zooming with each other from one another's homes. And I think it kind of adds to the relationship that you can build with people, because you're seeing the office, but then, when we were shut down for a couple months or trying to work from home for a couple months, you're going into people's homes and building the relationship that way. So, I would just say the diligence was very intense, long, very thorough, but we made it work. And, through Zoom, working kind of 24 hours a day or being able to adjust to time zones, we gave Todd and his team a tour around our facility on FaceTime, on my phone, walking around, and I made sure that we had our management team involved in a lot of the meetings. So we were here in the office with the management team sitting around the table, socially distanced, but at least we had everybody on the meetings and everybody involved with the diligence to give Todd and his team the opportunity to get to know all of us.
And Todd, how about from your perspective? How was the diligence process different for aMoon than pre-COVID?
Yeah, so I would say what we set out doing was we were going to do more, spend more time, and challenge the hell out of the companies, right? And so lots of interaction. So whereas before we might have over the course of the diligence process 5 to 10 interactions with management, we probably had closer to 20, so double the amount of interactions that we on purpose, right? And sometimes it was just to ask, very micro level questions, so that it was a chance to kind of test Melissa and her team and to build the relationship that way. So I would say lots more interactions. We spent a lot of time drafting and peppering the management team with questions because we wanted to see how they were going to react and how they react to kind of pressure and to challenges. So we did more on that front, and probably more than we even needed to do to kind of tease that out. Multiple, I would say, orthogonal points of information. So whereas we might go and speak to one or two board members or one or two KOLs, we covered the gamut, and then we went way outside of our network to gather feedback. So just trying to triangulate on things from multiple different ways. We did deep product demos, kind of not just ourselves, but with two technical advisors who actually said to us, it actually felt like I was there in the room with Melissa and her team. So we did that not only ourselves, but with two outside technical experts who could kind of corroborate what we were seeing as well. And then I would say the final thing is that, Agilent is an investor in the company. And so it did give us comfort that there is a New York Stock Exchange listed company that's in the market, knows this market, is active in the market. And so that did give us some comfort around, okay, this is not just us as a VC sitting in Israel who thinks that there is some excitement here, but there's actually kind of a blue chip, highly strategic company that's in the space. So yeah, those are kind of some of the things.
So Todd, along those lines, obviously MOBILION passed the test. Give us examples of things that a management team can do, it's a bad word, do wrong, or do that would not impress you, that would be a negative in that process, particularly the COVID-induced process.
Yeah, so I mean, I get this question a lot, like, what do you look for in a CEO? And there's a few things. And I would say what I really look for is the person who's a juxtaposition. You asked me to use a big word in this panel, so that's my big word.
Sentence is a big word. There you go, check the box.
I look for CEOs who are kind of juxtaposed, all right? So I look for somebody who's got IQ, EQ, and GQ. And I think you know kind of what I mean when I say IQ, EQ, and GQ. And it's very rare that you find people who can do all three of those things. And sometimes they're very kind of opposite each other. And so, but it's important for us to invest under a CEO who's got that. And Melissa has that in spades, I would say. We like CEOs who are confident, but they're not scared, I would say, to say that they don't know something or I need to get back to you. I hate it when a CEO thinks that they know it all and they wing it. I'd much rather hear a CEO come to me and say, I got to get back to you on this, or I want to check this out, okay? Because that gives me a sense that they're self-reflective, and that's important. I want somebody who's a problem solver and tenacious, but is also a listener, okay? And so these are kind of juxtaposed character traits. I want somebody who leads, but who's not scared to kind of bring their senior management team into the picture and into the room and let them kind of own the area that they're experts in. And I'd say, when did I know that I wanted to issue a term sheet to Melissa? It's when we were driving her, I think, a little bit crazy. And I think she was a little nervous about the fact that we said we are going to go run samples. And we wanted to run a whole bunch of samples on her instrument because we wanted to check this out. And we did it at an independent lab up in Boston. And a lot of CEOs would have looked at that and said, I'm not doing this, is a pain. I'm not. Melissa's reaction was, bring it on. And when I heard that out of her mouth, I just kind of knew this is a CEO who I kind of want to be with. And it's kind of from that moment on that kind of I made the psychological jump over, okay, this is an interesting company to this is a company with a CEO that, I want to back. So yeah.
Great. Great. So Melissa, turn to you. I know I had the pleasure of working with you closely during this, so I know the ins and outs, but we talk a lot about reverse diligence at the same time. So while Todd's going through and scrutinizing you and your management team, it's important for you and your management team, the company, to really be picking the right investor. So take that question the other way. What was it during the process that you were focused on to make sure that Todd and aMoon were the correct investors?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because we actually did have multiple term sheets on the table and had to make an executive decision at one point to turn down, really good offers even before the aMoon term sheet came in with, kind of goodwill faith that the term sheet was going to come in as we were going through the process. So it was a little bit of a gamble, but we thought it was worth it because of we really did think aMoon was the best investor for us. And in terms of the diligence that we did, I will say, yes, the diligence was intense. I laugh, all diligence is like running a marathon. I think we ran the 100-mile marathon, not the normal 26.2-mile marathon. But we are passionate about our business. We believe in it. Like Todd said, game on, right? And we so believe in what we're doing and we have the data to back it up. We have nothing to hide. So we love those challenges. And that's why we can't wait to get to market. And I think it speaks to the culture a little bit because as Todd said, we have nothing to hide. We need to have an open relationship. And, whether it's the team inside MOBILION, this is really hard stuff and you can't do it alone. And, whether it's the team here, it takes a team to make this work. It also takes an infrastructure with good investors and good board members to help the management team succeed. We can't do it alone. So we did a lot of diligence in terms of the pedigree of aMoon, who would be on the board, who's beyond Todd and behind Todd. It's a really, really impressive organization. I interviewed CEOs of portfolio companies, of the investors that, we were talking about accepting the term sheet to. So getting input from CEOs of their experience of working with aMoon. And, I can't stress enough, relationship, you have to enjoy working with one another. Otherwise your life is going to be miserable. But then from a business perspective, it's all about the business and it's all about the execution and it's all about the company. You really want to make sure that the people you're bringing onto your team share your vision, have the pedigree, have the resources, and are going to be value adding, right? There's good money and bad money, and you don't want to just take money to keep the company afloat. And, you really have to just hold out and look for the good money, and the good money are the people that just share in your vision and are going to have your back and help you, claw and scratch and make this thing succeed no matter what.
That's right. So Todd, in our waning couple minutes, I know in these panels that the audience loves to hear from our VC member in terms of your outlook, landscape. What are you doing looking forward? Have your investment focuses changed at all? So can you give us just a couple minutes of what is aMoon looking at now? Has it changed in the COVID era? What's your outlook on VC investing in MedTech? So kind of floor is yours to leave us with some stuff.
Yeah, so thank you. So I would say this is a great time to IPO a company, just given everything that's going on with the markets. But when you're investing into companies now, and I looked at it recently, the tools and diagnostics space, like many of those companies are trading at like 25 times forward revenue multiples. This was usually a EBITDA business, then it went to a kind of a trailing 12-month revenue multiple, and now it's a 2-year forward kind of multiple business. So I would just say what we're focused on really is underwriting sane multiples, right? Sane investments, and creating a lot of optionality within our investments. So if we can't see ourselves to kind of our target returns off of normalized multiples, because I don't know how long this market is going to last, it's kind of crazy. But if I can't see myself to a sane exit with sane multiples, I'm not going to do the deal based on kind of hyperinflated multiples. So that's kind of one thing. Second thing is I'm not underwriting to COVID at all, meaning that I can't tell you how many presentations I get across my desk every day that talk about we can do this for COVID. Hopefully COVID isn't with us for a lot longer, but I don't. Anybody who's basing their investment decision off of a COVID theme, I think is a problem. We certainly have much longer time frames than I hope COVID is with us, and if it is, then we're in bigger problems. And then I would just say, at the end of the day, again, it's about the quality of the management team, the amazing science, okay, that we look for in companies, and the ability to build moats, right? So technologies that are highly differentiated, and it's going to stand up against the test of time, against some of the really kind of big players who've got a lot more money to do things with. And so the fundamentals have not changed for us. We're actually going back even more to fundamentals, just given the hyperinflated valuations that are out there right now.
Oh, that's great. So before I turn to final words, I will point out, got a great question, but we really answered that. It was specifically looking at what were the responses to your due diligence questions, Todd, about the management team that convinced you to fund MOBILION. So we've hit that in spades. So I appreciate the question coming in. So as just a final point to both of you, if you could leave the audience with your last piece of wisdom of what you would tell the audience about getting financing in a COVID era. Melissa, we'll go with you first.
Never give up.
Yeah. Great one.
I mean, I think, yeah, it's just, I mean, for us, and again, it's COVID maybe, but even throughout the entire process, it's not an option to not get financing, right? What's the alternative? So you just can never give up. And ideally, if you start the process soon enough and you plan ahead well enough, because it's always going to take twice as long as you think, and you don't want to get in a situation where you're desperate and you have to take bad money. So, you know, it's not an option, to, at least right, never an option for us to not get financing, and you just have to plan ahead for the time it's going to take so that you are in a position to be able to choose the right investor. It's so critically important. Not all money is treated equally.
Yep. Todd?
I'd say for me, it's great. Tell me the good. Tell me the stuff that needs to improve. Show me where the gaps are and where you want to fill them and how you're going to go fill them. I'm much more impressed by seeing a plan that has some gaps and some knowledge about how we're going to fill those gaps versus somebody who shows me a plan that says, it's done, we're ready to go. I don't believe it when I see that. So I want honesty and truth and self-reflection.
Great. And mine will be prepare for success. COVID, as Todd mentioned, COVID is here only for the moment. And I get that there's a horizon ahead of us, but it's not forever. COVID is not unlike many obstacles that MedTech companies have faced during the years. There was a time where VCs turned their back on MedTech and biotech and made it very difficult to find financing. So I will say it's prepare for success. Have a plan, be diligent about that plan, be ready to pivot during that plan. But I like what Melissa said, just never give up and keep going. So with that, we finalize our panel. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate on behalf of PACT and on behalf of the audience, I really appreciate your participation. I introduce Phil Charron, who's the EVP at Think Company, who's going to be doing a fireside chat now with Eric Shelton of DSM Biomedical. So everybody, thanks so much for your time and your attention during the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hit the mute button. Thanks so much, Michael. That was a great talk. That gave us a lot of insight, I think, into just how that side of the business is going. And now we have a discussion with two people. We're going to start with Eric Shelton, who's the VP of Global Marketing and Sales at DSM. We'll have a quick chat about how DSM has been operating under COVID and how the pandemic has impacted that, and then we'll have a quick Q&A with folks around that, and then we'll switch over to Grant Geiger. My name is Phil Charron. I work for an experienced design and consulting firm here in Philadelphia called Think Company, and I'm just going to hand it over to Eric, really, to just Eric, why don't you introduce DSM and talk to us a little bit about what you do and what DSM is.
Hey, Phil, thank you. And first of all, I wanted to thank PAC and the opportunity to participate in the forum. Great first session. Fantastic. And thank you for the insights. I joined DSM Biomedical in January of this year, so is in the global leadership capacity for our commercial business. I think what's important here is to kind of level set who we are. DSM, we break out the broader DSM into three categories: health and nutrition. We have a materials cluster, and then our business specifically rolls into what we call our innovation center, which is kind of the think tank in an incubation as we look to spin businesses out to our standalone business. We're the largest company within the innovation center. Our focus really is, the broader DSM. We're all purpose-led and performance-driven businesses. We start with our mission, our value statement, our mission statement, which is solving our world's healthcare needs through sustainable science. And then we build upon that with we call our culture compass. So who are we and what's our purpose? Our purpose is we're creating brighter lives for all. And who are we? We're courageous, we're caring, and we're collaborative. And then what do we stand for? We take responsibility, we champion sustainability, and we deliver value to our customers and to the marketplace.
That's great. Just so everyone knows, we have a little bit of a challenge with Eric's audio here, so he's got the mute button there. Apologies for that. So Eric, maybe you can talk a little bit about how DSM was immediately impacted by the pandemic, and really what your reaction was, coming out of the gate in March.
I apologize for the technical issues. We're definitely going to work through them. No, if you classify the year, and I think we heard that in the first panel, the year's been very dynamic and challenging. And as we entered the COVID piece, we were talking earlier, before the shutdown happened, I was actually out in California visiting customers and supporting. And right before I walked into a meeting, received a phone call and said, "You can't come in. We can't have you in. We don't know where you've been and what you've been exposed to." And then I was worried about flying back to the East Coast. So luckily I made it. And I think with everyone else here on the calls, we've basically been shut down and working virtual since March. So that's presented challenges. But what DSM did and what the biomedical business supported is, as this happened and as we look to create brighter lives for all, it's how do we participate and add value to the COVID situation. And a couple of the early on initiatives is we partnered with we're headquartered in the Netherlands, and we partnered with the Netherlands government, and we developed a nasal swab technology to support the diagnostics testing of the COVID virus. That led to a breakthrough exemption in the Netherlands. We then tried to piggyback that here in the U.S. With manufacturing support as well as approvals. What we came to find out is we went out and engaged all of the diagnostic focused companies here in the U.S. is what we designed in the Netherlands worked, but what we tried to implement into the U.S. market, given the regulatory hurdles and clinical support, didn't work in the U.S. market. So while we had success in Europe, we pursued it in the U.S., we did not have success with that specific nasal swab technology in the U.S. And then building upon that is we have a PRP treatment device. And as you heard a lot about treating of convalescent plasma treatment, we proactively went out into the marketplace with that PRP device and tried to understand how do we potentially entertain the ability of the device to be used in convalescent plasma treatment. Again, based on clinical requirements and ultimately data generation, and as other technology was approved and came on, unfortunately, we didn't have traction there based on those hurdles. So we proactively attempted to support the COVID situation in the United States. We had better traction, in Europe. But we did not quite get the traction we were looking to get in the U.S. So again, very challenging time, but the intent was there, and the intent was to bring value to the situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it seems like you had a couple of hurdles, small successes with them, and also some real big challenges around trying to react immediately to the situation. Now that things have settled down in the day-to-day, how has the pandemic impacted business as usual, and how things changed since March in that realm?
Yeah, good question. And I think all of us on the call have been impacted. Us specifically, the biomedical business specifically, as I highlighted in the beginning, it's been a virtual world, and now we're having to adjust. And I really stress the value of the relationships and the value we bring to our partners, and enjoy the collaborative dialogue, sitting face to face and having that relationship building. So that's made it challenging. We've obviously in Exton, our headquarters in the U.S., we've gone to an essential workforce, so our manufacturing has not been interrupted. We did see, a large portion of our markets, our biggest market is the orthopedic space. We participate in the cardiovascular market. We have some drug delivery assets, and then we also we segment emerging markets, so dental, diabetes management, women's health, and wound management. And the biggest impact, very candidly, for us was the orthopedic space. And you saw the delays in the elective surgeries, the continuation of the trauma situation, and cardiovascular procedures, unless they were deemed absolutely necessary, got delayed as well. So that impacted us. Obviously, I think with probably the majority of the colleagues on the call here, the revenue numbers, top line revenue numbers haven't been what they needed to be. I will tell you that we are performing ahead of our customers in the marketplace. So where our customers have had a more negative impact year, we're going to be about flat. So if there's a positive lining, it tells you that, and I think we will recover as the surgeries come on, but it could be a 24-month delay. As these surgeries keep backlogging. Now I read every morning with third-party data that we're starting to delay procedures again and obviously make and accommodate the COVID-19 patients within the hospital space. So, yet to be determined how we go forward in the future. I don't think we'll see any changes in the way we operate as a business from a virtual platform situation. And we just have to be dynamic, and it's out of our control, and roll with the environment that we're in.
That's really interesting. Did you sort of try to anticipate this the second wave when it comes to the impact on elective surgeries, or was that did that come more as a surprise to your team?
I don't think it was a surprise. I think as you unfortunately turn on the news every day and you see the current situation, this has been very interesting because we're following a lot of third-party market data, and if you look at the third-party data, and I know that from a business perspective, no one's going to forecast in 2021 the potential negative impact, but we have to recognize it. All of the analyst reports that I've read and all of the customer interactions I've had is saying in 2021 that we will get back to a typical market where we'll see double-digit growth. I think the things that are compounding to potentially affect that, as we're all aware of, is the spike in cases. Are we going to have this Thanksgiving lull of increases? What's the timing on the vaccine being rolled out? So there's a lot of things that come into play. But in general, as we look to the future in 2021, everything that has been published has been positive. So as I would love to have a crystal ball and anticipate what may happen, we have to, the baseline situation is what have we experienced in 2020 and learn from it. And then ultimately, as we look at the market data and look to grow the business, and we have aggressive growth goals within those markets and within our biomaterials technology, which are really focused on Class 3 implantable devices, we have to roll with the punches and adjust. And that's in this business world. It's the old book I think we've probably all read, Who Moved My Cheese? So the ability to be adjust and be dynamic in this environment, I think, is critical for all of us.
Yeah, it's been. This year's been a really challenging year. I'm sure that it's everyone on the call today is probably recognizing that you make a plan and then you're throwing it out 2 weeks later and making a new plan and throwing it out 2 weeks later. So, putting together a plan for 2021 is probably a little bit of magic, a little bit of hope creep, but also, I think you're right. The data and what we're learning about the market it all seems to be positive news. It's just going to take time. So, do you have any? We're running a little bit out of time. We haven't gotten any. Oh, we did have one question that came up in the chat from Adam Salomon. How do you address the needs for tests that involve direct contact with patients and COVID safety regulation, crowd restrictions?
So our business models we're a B2B business model, so we don't interact direct with the patient. Any technology that we develop, we're going to a large orthopedic or cardiovascular company, and our focus is the true biomaterials contributing component that they then finish the device. We do have some 510K type products, and if we would have had success on the swab side, we would have been legal manufactured and own the regulatory to that. But we would have went to market through a distribution channel. I can tell you specifically as it relates to the biomedical business and the COVID safety concerns, within our facilities, We have had some customer visits, very frequent. There's a questionnaire to follow. Our employees go through a temperature check before they enter the building. We practice a social distancing piece. We're wearing the appropriate health and safety materials within the business itself. So from a direct to patient contact, we don't play in that space. So we haven't had that level of interaction.
That's understandable. Okay, I think we're running out of time here. We got to switch over to our other panelists. But thank you very much, Eric, for your time. And if other questions come up, I might send you back and have you pop back in. But we're going to switch over to Grant Geiger, healthcare right now. Their healthcare.
Sounds great. And thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you, Eric. All right, so Grant is going to be coming in a second. He's the CEO of Air Healthcare. Here he comes.
Hey, good morning.
There you are, Grant. Good. How are you doing?
Doing
great. I think you have a presentation you go through a little bit, and I'll pepper you with questions and see if any other questions come from the crew.
Absolutely. Let me get my my slides up, and let's see here. Hopefully, this should all work. All right. So, good morning, everybody, and thank you, PACT, again for having me on to talk a little bit about what we're working on and our response to COVID-19 here in the Philadelphia area. Couple things, just a few slides about ourselves. Air Healthcare is a company that I founded back in 2015 that focuses on what we call smart rooms, or highly engineered modular rooms for healthcare. We started by focusing on patient care in the hospital and looking at what is the evolution and changes from a technology standpoint in healthcare, and how do we find ways to integrate that into the physical space. So something that's probably not common in the market today, but we think that there are a couple of really interesting trends within healthcare delivery that's precipitating the change. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the focus is around how do we improve that experience, be it in a patient room, be it in a lab, in a outpatient, if it's even ambulatory. There's a focus around what does that space look like, and what does it feel like to patients and caregivers. Just quickly, if you're familiar with the company at all, what we put together in 2018, which you guys see on the slide, is MedModular. What's interesting for us is we view that with healthcare seeing a decentralized role, and certainly with COVID, it's been accelerated, the physical spaces are changing. And as I mentioned earlier, we think that there are some interesting advancements in technology around materials and building construction, which allow us to introduce new technology such as modular construction. So, on the right-hand side, or maybe it's the left, I think it's the right for all of us here, in 2019, we started working on what was our first project, which is actually a medical office building, where we're taking the entire MOB and we're building it off-site in a controlled environment. We're integrating sensors and IoT technology into that MOB in the factory, and then delivering something that's turnkey for that client, so that they can get that facility up and running. And so, we think that that's an interesting, new model in terms of where, healthcare is certainly heading. But, I think as a lot of the other speakers have mentioned earlier this morning, we've all had, various experiences and interactions with not only our customers and our clients, but our company's relationship to the market. And, we're no exception. So with COVID, we saw that there were things that have accelerated in healthcare that would drive, new changes. This is the slide that I wanted to share with all of you, and I'll break a lot of this down. Our focus earlier this summer was looking at COVID testing. As I mentioned earlier, we focused on patient rooms and things like that around the hospital care delivery model. But we realized, actually through our own employees, that the COVID testing programs that are available in the US today are not sufficient to actually provide I would say, the experience that patients are looking for, right? So today we see this in the news. We see that, generally, depending on where you go, you're seeing 5, 6, 7, or sometimes even longer day turnaround for a COVID-19 test. And the reality is that result, once it's delivered to you, it's not clinically relevant, right? If you have to wait 6 or 7 days to get that result, during that time, if you are positive with COVID-19, what is your time period? Are you quarantining during that time? Are you, out, in the community? And so the 5 to 7 days doesn't work. We started to take a look at this actually because of our own employees. During the summer, we had an employee who went on a vacation, came back, and we said to him, look, before you come back, we need you to go get a test before you come back into our office. And it took him 8 days to get a result. So we took a look at the problem, and what we realized is that, obviously COVID has been an accelerant for a lot of different things in the healthcare space. But one of them is what we look at in regards to what we think is what we call the immediacy problem, right? If you want to know if you have COVID or not, the reality is you are looking for a result immediately. You're looking for an opportunity to get tested immediately. And the traditional healthcare system that we all live in today, that model, that ecosystem, I didn't fully build it out, right? I don't have payers here, and I don't have a couple of other different components to it. It's nobody's fault, but the reality is that system isn't built for pandemics. And the best responses that we've seen so far have come from the biotech and life science spaces, where companies have pivoted to provide a solution to provide testing. And so if you look at the bottom half of the slide, you see companies that maybe some of you are familiar with: BioMeme, Biocept, Fluidigm, there's others, Fluxergy. There's a whole host of really exciting companies that actually started or operate normally in a completely different space, be it oncology. I think some of them are doing some vector and wildlife disease testing. But the point is, it's interesting for us, and what we've noticed, that a lot of folks in the market found a way to bring a solution and to bring results, and to be able to address the problem that we have today, which is a lack of access to testing and a responsive turnaround time. Just back in the beginning of October, we launched, in response to this, MedMod Labs. And here in the Philadelphia area, we have created a system where we have been able to get results to all of our patients within 24 to 36 hours. We've actually rolled out corporate programs with about 3 or 4 different companies in the Philadelphia area, where they bring their employees in to get tested on a weekly or monthly basis. And, I thought one of the most interesting insights that we've been able to learn from, which is a part of the market that we have, I think, overlooked, is a large portion of our clients are folks that are coming in that need to get a test because they either had to travel for work, right? We talked about that earlier. Everybody's been doing a lot of Zooming. Everybody's been in front of their computer like we are this morning, but there have, been folks that have needed to travel. And this is something that provides, a solution to them. So, interestingly enough, this is something that we have then started to look at and analyze a little bit further. And what we realized is that what we've put together has actually led to an opportunity for new opportunities within healthcare, which I'm going to touch on in just a second. But what we really realize is, if you take a look at testing, if you take a look at schools, restaurants, offices, this whole back to work concept that we've all discussed, the delivery of healthcare has changed, where healthcare is something that is going to be moved even further to the forefront of patient engagement, even further directly in front of the patient, to as close as we possibly can get to a consumer type experience. And so with that, we developed this idea further with MedMod Labs around how can we use modular construction to create an integrated solution with software, and in this case with COVID, with diagnostic solutions with our partners, to essentially create a clinic or a testing site or some other type of vehicle, if you will, but something that is small, compact, and out of the box. So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna. This is all very interesting. It makes me wonder, like, how much of the innovation that we've seen developed over the past 9 months, how much of that is going to stick around, and how much of that is something that's really just there for pandemic situations, for instance.
It's a great question. And I think Todd mentioned that earlier regarding COVID specific responses. And I think, a lot of the things that we see I think, to be honest, a lot of it will very much change, right? But I also think at the same time, we've seen, as I said earlier, that, COVID and the pandemic has been this accelerant for a lot of changes. And so maybe what you see on the screen today here won't be around in 2021 or 2022. But there will be some sort of iteration of it because the delivery of healthcare has changed.
Yeah.
So.
And the wait time discussion is really interesting to me, because in the many healthcare interactions that I've had in the past 9 months, not just for myself but for family members whose health I've been helping them manage, I've noticed that nobody's sitting in waiting rooms anymore. So somehow they've figured out a way to manage that efficiency, in just that small part of the healthcare system. Like if you, everyone's probably been through the situation where you pull up into the parking lot and wait for your phone call to go into the building to go see the healthcare provider that you're going in to see.
Right.
But the wait in your car seems to be a lot shorter than the waits I've had in the waiting room before. So I don't really have a question around it, just more just an observation, I guess.
No, it's interesting. I was speaking to a colleague of mine who is at Johns Hopkins the other day, and he was talking to me about the concept, and others have mentioned this before, that primary care is broken, right? And because of COVID, it's the primary care model of you going into, just like you said, going into the doctor's office, sitting in a waiting room. You have to call and you have to schedule that appointment 4 weeks in advance, or sometimes even longer. That whole thing is it's already been under, I would say, duress to a certain extent. And this pandemic has sort of changed that. And, to that point, what we've sort of realized is that this model that we've developed, it's not really about COVID, right? It's about care delivery. And, we've now been in talks. This has sort of evolved into interesting conversations about community health. It's about rural healthcare. If we're in the city of Philadelphia, in a dense urban environment, or pick your city, New York, Boston, LA, there's plenty of options for healthcare. But one of the things we realized as well in that situation is, again, COVID sort of exposed this, was that we don't have solutions that are embedded directly into a community, right? So if I needed to go to get a COVID test today, I have to have a car, right? I have to use public transportation, and I probably have to go into a waiting room or an emergency room or a hospital to do it. So, I think a lot of these things will certainly change. I just wanted to show this slide to give everyone a little bit of a perspective, but the interesting thing here is, and the reason why we focused on shipping containers, I'm sure everybody here may have seen, on HGTV, there's container homes and things of that nature. But there's an interesting application for this in healthcare. And the interesting thing is that containers are intermodal. So what that means is that I can take a container that I've standardized. They either come in usually, 10 feet, 20 feet, 40-foot containers. But I can deploy those anywhere in the country within generally about 2 business days. They all fit on the truck, they all fit on a boat, they all fit on a train. And so when you have a situation like we do today, you have a model where there's already an existing network that allows me to push healthcare into places where it hasn't been traditionally. And so, again, our conversation today and the presentation is not necessarily about what we were doing for COVID, but about how how this has sort of led to new ways in which we think people can access care, which I think is a more interesting conversation.
And that's great. We're running low on time, but there is one question in Q&A, and I'm going to steal a little bit of Dean's time. But the person asked, how scalable is manufacturing capacity for MedMod Labs? I think you kind of answered it with the shipping container part, but I don't know if there's any other parting thoughts you want on that.
Here's what I'll say. It's actually kind of an interesting thing that we dug into this year. So containers are something that's actually a surplus in this country because of our trade with China and other countries. So in terms of scalability for manufacturing, there's a lot of modular companies that have experience in retrofitting and building out these containers, and there's a surplus of containers available. So the short answer is it's extremely scalable. There are quite a few manufacturers throughout the country, both for the East Coast and out to California as well, that can handle it. And we work with a huge portion of them to deliver this. So we think it's something that can really grow. Great.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Well, maybe don't look forward to seeing them all over the place, but I think it. but I think it's a great approach. You're right. Like, we've seen the shipping containers sort of because of their modularity and just their ubiquity being something that's used for more than.
Yeah, it's just a way to think. It's just about thinking differently, Phil, right? And it's about looking at, we have to find ways to drive down the cost of care. And one of the first things we can do is think about the physical space that we all spend that time in.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to continue this talk, Grant. This is great. It's been great learning about Air Labs, but I know that Dean is, of course, jumping in, and he's going to take over for the last part of this. So thank you, Grant. Thank you, Eric, and Dean. Back to you.
Thank you, Phil and Grant. And really, thanks to all of our speakers and panelists. I want to thank once again, our sponsors, Fox Rothschild, Eisner Amper, and Dwayne Morris, and particularly our moderators, Michael Harrington, partner of Fox Rothschild and PACT board member, Phil Charron, EVP at Think Company, both just tremendous supporters of our community and great PACT members as well. But also Melissa, Todd from Israel, Eric, and Grant. We invite you to stay. We're going to move right now into networking. We have a little more than 15 minutes. We'll stop at 10 o'clock, but you'll be able to move from table to table and have some conversations joined by some of our panelists and speakers. So let's move on to networking. Thank you.